Well, good morning. Yesterday we had a deputy-involved shooting up in the East Mountain area. So yesterday at about 3:30 p.m., the deputies responded to a call in the area of Frost and Roberts Road yesterday. The initial call came in from a calling party who was the grandfather of the residents, and he basically told the dispatcher that there was somebody armed with a shotgun in his home threatening another family member in the residence. When deputies arrived, they identified one of those persons with the shotgun. It has been confirmed by the detectives that there was a shotgun on scene. Rescue was on standby during the incident, and immediately after the suspect was shot, he was transported to the hospital. He, as of this morning, is in stable condition. He has been moved to ICU, and he's being expected to recover and is facing non-life-threatening injuries. The CI Criminal Investigations and Metro Shoot Team are investigating at this time, and deputies' interviews have not been conducted yet. So we will not be able to release the names of the deputies that were involved in the shooting until after those have been conducted. We're anticipating that those will be conducted tomorrow. So after those have been conducted, we'll release the names of the deputy or deputies and the suspect in the incident. It is unclear at this time how many shots were fired, who fired those shots, because we haven't done those interviews. Based on the preliminary investigations, the charges that the person will be facing is aggravated assault with a deadly weapon on a household member. And currently the deputies are in contact with the family and giving them updates. This is the fifth shooting we've had in 2017, and just to put it in better perspective, probably within the last 30-some days. So that being said, we will be having a follow-up. Are there any follow-up questions that you would have?
I know yesterday you couldn't really go into who the suspect is, and we still can't today, and that's understandable, but could you give us any kind of background? Is it possible to be general about a criminal history of any kind?
There is a criminal history there. We have recent calls there, very as recent as, I'm going to say, the last couple of weeks. So this has been a pretty active residence, and calls of service we've received there within the, I'm going to say, the last 6 months, but up to probably even the last year or two.
Did the armed person also live at the home with the grandfather?
I'm not exactly sure if he was residing there or not, but after the interviews I've done with the people that reside there, we'll find out.
What were those calls from? Were those domestic violence calls?
Yes, very similar to what we received yesterday, domestic violence disturbances or calls.
Did the suspect threaten, was he actively threatening family members or the sheriffs when he was shot?
Well, according to the calling party, he was threatening the person at the residence. So based on the information we received, there was a threat to the person that was living at the residence.
But during the shooting scene?
Oh, that Jim, I have, the interviews haven't been conducted. I'm not even privy to that information. We're in the preliminary stages of the investigation. Until the deputies actually give their statements, we won't actually really know what happens. And we don't want to ever taint an investigation by giving information on a suspect or what may have occurred, because we don't want them to alter their statements. We want to be able to have them give us statements based on what happened and their limited knowledge of what they're getting through the media.
You mentioned the fifth deputy involved shooting this year, fifth in about a month.
Yes.
What do you attribute the sudden spike to?
You know what, we're all concerned. I'm having conversations with my deputies. I just had a conversation in the elevator with one of the deputies as I was coming into work, and he said yesterday he was off work and he was up in the East Mountains just biking. But he was telling me that the conversations he was having with the general public, because they had a conversation. They found out he was a deputy sheriff, and they're trying to figure out themselves is like what's going on in this town, what's going on in this community, what is prompting people to act out with these behaviors that we haven't seen. I'm going to say for as long as I've been in law enforcement, And for the sudden spike, and we're hoping that maybe it's just something out of the ordinary, but hopefully this isn't a norm. Because if it is, we're very concerned. And obviously, we're raising our concerns to the county commission. Tomorrow, we'll be we'll be going in front of the county commission, asking for more people. And that is I think a serious matter. I think that's part of the reason that the public passed the public safety tax. And I think that's, as far as I'm concerned as a sheriff, that's where the money needs to go.
How many more deputies would you like to have?
At this point, through what we're looking at, we're asking for 60.
60 additional?
Yes. And basically not maybe at all one time, maybe in phases of 20 at a time. But we need to get them everywhere into the schools. We need to get them out in the field. And we need them out there so they can actually help de-escalate some of these situations.
In the recent legislative session, they made a point, they've got all these cuts around the state, but they made a point not to cut from law enforcement. But there's a difference between not cutting and also not providing more money. Is it fair to say this still isn't enough?
Yes, it's fair to say that. I think it's very fair to say that. It's saying that, they ask me all the time, you're 100% staffed. Yes, but that's not enough to take care of all the issues and all the way the public's feeling right now. They're not feeling safe. And for us to be able to make them feel safe, we need more deputies in the field. We need more deputies in the schools. We need more deputies to do these investigations. And we need more people out there to provide the service that the citizens are requesting.
When speaking with the deputies, do they all feel now that they're more at risk with this spike in violence against law enforcement?
I could tell you in a conversation that I've had even with some of the people that have been involved in these incidents, they're even asking me what's going on. So absolutely, I'd say yes. They're absolutely concerned. And like I said, we haven't seen anything like this for as long as I can remember. So it's a concern of mine, it's a concern of theirs, and it should be a concern of the public's.
Sheriff, you mentioned going before the county commission is kind of the first step in asking for more staff. Is it possible to just kind of talk to us about the process and the likelihood of how soon we could see the numbers increase?
Well, I think tomorrow's it's going to be up for discussion. So then there's a process. After we have that discussion, then they'll have to figure out, I guess, how to budget for that. And through a proposal, we'll tell them what we need. And hopefully through that support of getting those numbers that we need, they'll look at it and we'll figure out hopefully in the next 1, 2, or 3 years how we get that done.
Sheriff, you mentioned that you're going to the commission tomorrow to ask for more funding for staff. How are you dealing with this internally? Is there any sort of message that you're sending to your deputies in this time? I know that those who are going through this must have a difficult time with it, but then others seeing it happen, how do you address that?
Well, we constantly are going out to talk to our deputies in these briefings. So it's constantly telling them what they need to do to stay safe. And that would be like team policing, intelligence-based policing, having the community be our eyes and ears and having them be part of the communication that we need, and mobilizing the citizen to help us do what we need to be effective. So for us, it's not one-dimensional on our part from law enforcement saying, hey, we're taking this on all by ourselves. We have a strategy with all my command staff to sit there and figure out how do we get support from all the community so we can be safer. And that even comes from the media, whether it's public safety announcements, education. It's not like a one-dimensional thing. It's a strategy that includes everybody.
Sheriff, I know it's still unclear last night, but do you know at this point how many deputies are on administrative leave?
Yes, and I failed to mention that. I'm glad you asked. So there'll be 4 deputies and 1 sergeant on administrative leave. And the reason for that, that's the standard policy and procedures, but also because all of them were involved in the event at some point and took some type of action. So they'll all need to be interviewed.
Could you again talk about your opposition to on-body cameras?
It's not my opposition to body-worn cameras. I don't ever like, I like to speak for myself. So I don't have an opposition to it. Nothing's been proven to me that there's no scientific research that shows they work. But I think that if maybe body-worn cameras could be used, maybe they should be used to be placed on the people that are committing these crimes. Because to me, it's like, let's hold people accountable. They're actually wielding guns or going out there and committing crimes, these violent crimes that the public's concerned about, and not focus on law enforcement. I think they were introduced into law enforcement with not a lot of thought. There was no policies created, and there was no reason for them. Now, I've yet to be summonsed by a citizen or anybody's asking me, why don't your deputies have these come to my office with that concern? Because those are, to me, trust issues. Well, there is no trust issues with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office and their deputies. So to me, there's no reason to have body-worn cameras at this point. And I don't see any time in the near future that they would be needed. Where we need an immediate probably change or make a difference is staffing. That's what would make a difference at this point. So if we get the staffing, that would have an immediate impact on the type of service we give. And hopefully that would de-escalate the situations. But there's nothing proven by body-worn cameras. And it's not I'm against them. Nobody's provided me with enough information to make a informed decision to support that, because we have a lot of priorities at the Sheriff's Department we want to get done. And that's not on the top of them. And we need things for infrastructure, we need things for training, we need things for our deputies to be equipped to keep people safe. We're in the business of keeping people safe and protecting them.
You mentioned 60 new deputies, but it's not just deputies. That's potentially more equipment, more training, more vehicles. Is there a general figure that 60 deputies would cost?
Yes, we did come up with the number, and I think the undersheriff is.
Right around $9 million.
Yesterday.
And that's the first year. So that's the startup cost. The following year, it wouldn't be as much, because some of that includes the training, some of the equipment, and some of the other things that you need to get started up with.
Yesterday, you briefly touched on communication and technology in the East Mountains can be really tricky. I know it wasn't an issue yesterday, but could you talk about how you guys might navigate that in the future? I know it's kind of a tricky area with cell service or radio service. What could you tell us about how you might try to navigate that?
Well, it's constantly working with our political stakeholders, that are internally from the county, the city, the state. All of us have the same concerns. We all want to be able to communicate on the same system. There's some value to having a standardized communication system for us to be able to provide the best service for everybody, and locally and even in the region. So for us, it's like this isn't just a concern for the county, but this is a concern for the city and the state. So we just continue to have those discussions and figure out how are we going to generate or get that revenue to provide that communications our deputies and all law enforcement needs out there.
Can you take us through the process of what happens after these shootings to these deputies, administrative leave times, what it's like to be in their shoes after this?
Yes, it's something that the deputy has to sit there and they're going to have to go through and give statements, possibly a criminal statement, probably an internal affairs statement. They're going to have to go through and possibly meet with the psychologist, and then they'll get recommendations in terms of like what their mental state is, to whether they decide whether they need to come back to work or they need to be off work a little bit longer, or what fits that particular deputy at that time based on the amount of trauma they dealt with during the incident. So after that, it's something that not only do they go internally, but there's some other unspoken things that they go through, because there's a lot of criticism, the things they see in the media, the way they're perceived. There's a lot of stress that goes along with that shooting, a lot of burden that they carry. And it's a very difficult situation for them. So we try to be as supportive of them to figure out what their needs are, so that they get through this incident and they can move on and then go back into the service they want to continue to provide for the people. This is their passion, and their calling. So for us, it's just one of those things we want to be very supportive of the deputy and figure out what they need.
And the names of those deputies won't be released until they're interviewed, right?
Not till after they give their interviews.
And that concludes our press conference.